As you say this, I'm like, oh my God, everybody's going to have agents impersonate them with all the deep fakes. I don't even know who I'm talking to anymore. And now agents can literally log into your email and your Slack and then send messages on your behalf. I don't know what the future is going to look like, but yeah, that sounds super interesting.
So I'll share this one first. This is Archer, an assistant built into Slack. This is where I say the promise overextends and we fill with our imagination sometimes, because while I would love an agent to be able to do that, the best way to defend against that is just proper semantic versioning.
Sam, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, very excited to do this. So for everybody, watching today, we also have a second co-host today. Alexander, you want to say hi?
Hi, nice to see everyone.
Alexander, maybe we'll start with you just so that everybody gets to know you as a co-host. So who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm the VP of Engineering here at Fellow, and I've been working here since 2018, back when there was no AI out in the world like there is today, back when we were focusing on creating manual meeting agendas. And I've been working with Aiden for the last 13 years and very excited for today's conversation.
All right. Wow. It's been 13 years. Crazy, 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 crazy. Sam.
Hey.
I'd love for you to maybe tell everybody a little bit about your background. I know today you're obviously founder at Arcade.dev, and that, we'll put in show notes and everyone should check out. But maybe before we talk about the company and what you do today, just tell us a little bit about your background and, all the things that kind of led to the role you play today.
It's an interesting background, or an interesting way of getting into AI. It was through high performance computing. Back more than a decade ago, I was working on a parallel programming language called Chapel. And that language and my work on it parlayed into some work on simulation models and large scale simulations, things like climate simulations. And then I started to look into applying AI to large scale simulations, culminated in a work called SmartSim, which ended up being a research topic I worked on for a while. And that kind of snowballed into really being fascinated by all things AI. And like Alexander said, back when we used to have to use C++, have a PyTorch hook to copy embeddings out of models, we couldn't just call an API to get embeddings for text and use vector databases. We had bag of words. Back then, it was not so easy, and now it is incredibly easy. And I feel very fortuitous to have had, gotten into this place at this time through this kind of non-traditional path of high performance computing. But I ended up going to Redis, leading the vector database team there. And then now you know the story, started Arcade with Alex Salazar.
Yeah, very, very cool. So what is Arcade?
Essentially, to know what Arcade is, you have to know what a large language model tool is, essentially a function. We call it the hands of agents. If the LLM is the brain, the tools are its hands. And so when an agent wants to go and do something, it needs to be able to actually execute some type of code. It does this by producing text that then can go into that function, just like f of x equals y. It predicts the x, you get the y. And so these are actions that agents can take. And what Arcade is essentially it's a library of these actions combined with an auth library. You can think of it like Okta, so that agents are actually able to act on your behalf, like reading your email or sending Slacks or going and checking out your Salesforce records.
For everybody listening, the tools are when you go to ChatGPT and you ask it something and it needs to surf the internet. Surfing the internet would be a tool. And so if I understand this correctly, so Arcade is kind of this library that if I wanted to allow whatever agent that I was using to do things on my behalf, like say that I wanted it to send a Slack message on my behalf or send an email on my behalf, it's got to log into all of these tools somehow on my behalf. And you guys basically make it possible for agents to do that.
Exactly.
I mean, that sounds pretty cool.
Making it easy for agents to actually go and do the things you want them to be able to do. That's really the important part, is that all the interesting things and powerful things that you want agents to be able to do require you to log in first.
Yeah, it's crazy because, as you say this, I'm like, oh my God, everybody's going to have agents impersonate them. With all the deep fakes, I don't even know who I'm talking to anymore. And now agents can literally log into your email and your Slack and then send messages on your behalf. I don't know what the future is going to look like, but yeah, that sounds super interesting.
Absolutely. Well, that is why there's a team of former authentication nerds and Okta engineers and what have you that we've assembled to make sure that nothing goes wrong.
I'm curious to know about some of the workflows that people have been able to come up with that, because that sounds like it enables a lot of different things.
It's a really good point about workflows. So one of the really interesting ones is what we've been calling an ambient workflow. I don't know if Harrison coined this or not, but an ambient agent is defined as something that basically runs in the background. One of the really useful ones that people have seemingly really latched onto is that social media agent that we were talking about before the show. Essentially, this agent goes out on the internet, curates content, and then posts it, paraphrasing it, posting it across LinkedIn and Twitter. And with Arcade, it's doing so as you. So it looks like you are just the most active social media manager of all time, and you've never even logged into Twitter yourself. And so that's one of the workflows that, going and getting that content, paraphrasing it, and then posting it on your behalf, that ambient style workflow has become very popular.
Oh, wow. I'm curious, do people need to approve things before they get posted? Because I know that's been a pretty big topic of discussion lately of like, do you let the agents work on their own or do you require approval? I know Cursor had what they called YOLO mode for just, like writing the code without running the terminal commands without approval. So yeah, what do you find about that?
There is a YOLO mode. You can just let it have your social media, but typically people are using things like LangGraph to orchestrate their agents to be able to do human in the loop. So frameworks like LangGraph and other ones are able to, either through tool calling or things like interrupts, be able to stop and wait for human approval, which allows that kind of gating mechanism you're talking about so that you don't have it accidentally tweet something, you don't want it to.
And one of the things for everybody listening, and all the tools we're mentioning, sign up at thisnewway.com to the newsletter. We're going to include all of these so you can go check them out afterwards as well. This sounds super interesting. So maybe let's start at the beginning. Obviously, this is an AI first company, right? So AI is very much at the core. This is developer tooling. So people are building AI applications using your platform. I know you're building an AI product, so the product wouldn't have existed. But because AI is where it is, how do you think that this company has been built differently? Or how has it impacted the way that this company has come about, the way it operates? What is the actual impact on you building?
Well, that's a great question. One, we're leaner. So, it takes fewer people to do what we used to do before. And
can you give us a sense of what does leaner mean? So, people who are listening in, they're like, a team of this is able to do what a team of X would need to be assembled to do before.
I'll give a kind of approximate answer because I think doing anything too close is a little silly. But approximately, I would say an engineer is 1.5 times better than they were before. If they are post grad type engineer that has a CS degree, knows how a program should look, they are essentially 1.5 times faster and more productive with the right tooling in their hands and knowing how to use it. Now, I've thrown in some caveats there, right? So knowing what you're talking about, knowing what a program should look like, having that experience. If you don't, and you're just tabbing your way and completing through everything, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you have unmaintainable code that doesn't make any sense. And it's not actually Cursor's fault. It's from what's called compounding errors. Even the tiniest mistake, right? If you don't spot it and you just tab complete, then can compound and make serious deleterious effects on your program. So if you are not already initiated, right, you actually become worse. And so just like I'm saying you can be more productive, there's also this downside of, this human laziness factor where it's really, really tempting to just press tab.
Yeah, so the tab for just auto-completing the code.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious to dive in more on what you said about, the average engineer is getting to be 1.5 times more productive. Because I think that word productive can be viewed very differently by different people in the org. Like Aiden as CEO probably thinks of productive as, more output, more features being built. And an average engineer might care more about tests and quality and making sure that the same feature is done, but maybe it's more well tested. There are fewer bugs going out and it's easier to maintain. So different people are going to have different views on that. Are you finding that you're focusing more on just accomplishing more or increasing the quality overall, or both?
It is both. Well, since we have this auth component, right, that we have to go one by one and essentially to each of these services make sure that our OAuth and our generic OAuth connector is compatible, which like every service, right? I mean, Microsoft's is completely different than, somebody else. And so like Google, for instance, they're completely different and they should be all OAuth 2 standard compliant, but they're not. There's like little tweaks to each one. And so being able to go and just retrieve that documentation for all of those OAuth connectors and read them and say, what are the differences without actually navigating to the websites, that makes you a lot more productive in the sense that you are saving the time of actually like the physical clicking around to the documentation. Another on the flip side of what you're talking about, the kind of quality side, is like coverage is usually much higher in PRs these days. If you're talking about like test coverage, because if you have a reasonable set of what are called cursor rules by which you guide the LLM inside of Cursor to program for you, if you have a reasonable set of cursor rules for your project, the tests can usually be auto-generated if you already have some in an existing module. And it at very least can be templated out. Now, again, there has to be that human factor of saying, am I doing the right thing? Am I parameterizing these tests? Is this an efficient form of testing? Am I actually covering what should be covered? Or is this just a BS coverage metric, right? And if you're not an actual engineer, you're not going to know that, right? But it's still going to make you able to produce those tests and that amount of coverage faster than you were before. And that does result in higher quality because there's always that last 5% of a PR that doesn't really get done. And nowadays, it's a lot less of that, I think.
Yeah. And just to add to that too, I find that, engineers get a boost in productivity by other people using Cursor too. So something we've started doing recently is it's not just the engineers who have Cursor, it's also the product managers, QA. I use it a lot. And by having these people able to ask questions instead of bugging engineers and taking them out of their focus flow, the engineers themselves become more productive because everyone else around them has these tools too.
I have a hilarious story about that. It's my co-founder, Alex Salazar. I introduced him to Obsidian, and this is before Cursor, and like how it just produced Markdown files. And at the time, I was doing a lot of RAG projects. I was leading the Redis team, and we hadn't, I actually started the company yet, but I introduced him to this Markdown editor that I love. And I built him this little RAG system so that he could ask questions of his notes. And it's like an early Cursor chat, And I remember seeing him be like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then he got Cursor and now he's addicted. Now he can't live without it. And he'll tell you he's got pages on pages on pages of Markdown notes and he uses it every day.
Sam, he's using that instead of Obsidian as a personal note taker, not for code. He's just using Cursor for, that's a novel use case.
Yeah, no, just Markdown files. So I also love how Markdown has kind of become this kind of ubiquitous format amongst LLMs because I think it was because there was so much training data already available in Markdown formats. And it was also easy because of things like Pandoc to convert to and from Markdown. Like PDF to Markdown was already like a pretty standard flow. And so we were able to generate a lot of that training data. I think that's why. But like if you keep all your notes in Markdown, LLMs are excellent at editing your notes and reading your notes and curating your notes. And I have an Arcade toolkit for Obsidian that I use in Claude.
This is super interesting, right? Like, I think a lot of technical teams can kind of relate, whether they're building integrations, connectors, like you said, where it's like the same type of work, but it's a little bit different for each and every one. And these things tend to break, right? Because whatever company you're trying to integrate with will change something on their end. And then I could imagine, like, are you guys literally writing things that go check the documentation? If something changes, it will somehow notify you? Does it like fix things itself, or how does that work?
This is where I will say the promise overextends and we fill with our imagination sometimes, because while I would love an agent to be able to do that, the best way to defend against that is just proper semantic versioning. and the software practices that we've been doing for the last like 30 years. Like, don't put out a release that's not a major release if it's not a major release, and don't put out a patch release, and make sure that you bump your SDKs in your software and you create, you accurately version your software and your dependencies. But I will say it's still much better when you go to do things like reviewing PRs, like, hey, do any of the dependencies need to be updated? You can ask that question. There's a little bit of help there, but still at the end of the day, you got to know how to version your software. AI software is no different.
So that's super cool. So you guys are, again, so 1.5 times more productive if you know how to use the tools. Any other impacts like that you would say on the company? What about just like process things, how you hire? Like, is there any other areas that you've found that AI has really helped?
Oh, yeah. I mean, hiring, reading resumes too. We're able to scan and look for a lot of different types of people and also communicate with those people easier because we have the ability to say, send an automated outreach email to these 150 candidates that we seem interested in. And to do that, we write one message and the LLM can auto-generate personalized ones for each candidate. Now, that may seem a little sketchy in some ways, but it is really helpful when, people want jobs and we have a job to give. And so at the end of the day, we're still giving them what they want.
Okay, so let's quickly talk about your personal work. So how has AI impacted what you do?
I'd say on a day-to-day basis, the biggest one's my calendar and email. I also just recently I know I'm throwing this one out of the blue, but I just made an iMessage agent or an iMessage arcade tool. So I can send texts from like Claude, which is pretty cool.
How does that work? You have to say more. Like, that sounds very useful.
Yeah. So the arcade agent the arcade toolkit runs and serves the tools on your laptop. And then with Tailscale, I can be anywhere, right? And hit my laptop through a secure network. And so anywhere I open Cursor or what have you, I can go and hit that Tailscale address and that arcade toolkit server. And so with that, I'm able to then read, respond, curate all of my text messages. I do the same thing with email. And I actually, through Twilio, have text reminders. Like, for instance, for this podcast, 10 minutes before the meeting, I get a text reminder that I had this meeting. And so things like that, they might seem simple, but no longer do you have to go in and set up a webhook and set up it's just a Gmail and a GCal agent that is like running I think I schedule it for every hour, and it then performs actions that it thinks it should based on what content is available to it.
Are there any tasks that you still do manually? Because that sounds like LLMs are really doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you.
I will say there's a lot more time with people, that's for sure. A lot more time spent with customers and asking customers what they want, because an LLM can't accurately go get customer sentiment yet. You can fill out a bunch of surveys all you want, but you're not going to see customer pain until you go up to that customer at that customer site and hear their story about the pains that they had with your product and like how you can improve it. That today I think is still not automated. And so I spend a lot more time doing that and trying to improve our product, and a lot less time scheduling and busy work. That's for sure.
So describe this to me. So how does your email process work?
Yeah. So anybody who's curious, you can check out the agent inbox on github.com, Arcade.AI, but I'm sure they'll put links in the description of this podcast. But essentially what it does is I think it's hour or so, it's like a cron job. It will go and it will read whatever emails I haven't opened yet. If it believes that email is important, it will leave it unopened. And then it will put it in a queue of things to be sent to an LLM again that is more powerful to decide, should I respond? Is this urgent? And basically label it and then put a Gmail label on it. And so it will be unread and labeled by the time I go and look at it. And if it's urgent, I will get a notification.
Wow, it's super cool. And so will it draft a response?
It does. It does. So if it is, you can do it if it's urgent, or if you want to draft an email to every one that it qualifies as a personal or important email, it can draft. And also with Arcade, obviously, it can draft and send all of those emails if you want it to. So as soon as you click the box, check, sends it.
This is super interesting, right? Because, this type of activity is typically what you would do with an executive assistant, right? The idea of reading your
Which
emails.
I still have, by the way. Which ones are urgent, which ones sound like you can create draft replies for. And I guess what's really cool about this is that I don't know if the agent does this, but can it search all of your previous emails and understand what you have previously communicated with this person and maybe use that to also craft the response? Yeah. So with Arcade, whether it's Cursor or Claude or, Arcade Chat or chat.arcade.dev, if I have a question about any of those things, I just say, what's the last 5 emails I got from this person? And then it will go and retrieve Gmail list emails by header, and it will fill out the username for the email. And so then it will go and retrieve those 5 emails and tell me if I have those.
Again, I'm sure everybody listening and is like, this sounds amazing. How can I do it too? And so that's a good segue for us to jump into show and tell mode. Should we start with the email one, since we're talking about it right now, and then maybe we can jump into, I'd love to see how you use Cursor and what kind of flows you use on a typical day to day. But can we start with what the email agent might look like, or how people can go about trying to get this for themselves?
So I'll share this one first. This is Archer, which is essentially an assistant built into Slack. So all of those things, the email assistant, the social media assistant, all of those capabilities are also in Archer because they're all Arcade tools that I can give to any agent. This one happens to be a LangGraph agent. And so if I just say, let's say something like, what's on my calendar today, and it will go and say Archer's working on it. And then since I've already logged in to Slack, it is going to know that it's me. And then on my behalf, it is going to go and reach out to, I believe in this case, it's GCal, Google Calendar. And then it's going to tell me that I've got meetings with AWS, meetings with you guys, and some other. And I can go to this event and see this here.
For people watching, this is something that you have built using Arcade, and this is a developer tool. So if someone wants to use this, if you're a developer, you can use Arcade and you can build a chatbot like this on Slack. Can non-technical people use this stuff as well, or they should just work with their technical teams to build this?
Yeah, so if I just wanted to show some of the ones that it'll say it has access to. So any agent can be equipped with Arcade tools. One we're going to be releasing here pretty soon is the ability to work with Claude. So
that's super useful.
Yeah, if you are not a technical person, but you want to be able to use these kinds of tools, you can really easily be able to do this through Claude. We're going to be releasing a way to do this here really soon. It works with Cursor today, but I'll show a little preview of this now just because I think it's cool. Why don't I do the same thing I did before? So let's do something different. What do you want to say? Let's read my last 10 emails and tell me about them. Let's see if it'll do it today.
Is this using MCP to do this, or how does it actually gain access?
What's going to happen here is this is actually Arcade supports the standard IO and the HTTPS protocols. And so what you're able to do is essentially use Arcade tools just like you would MCP tools. And so essentially they're interchangeable because of how Arcade supports multiple protocols for tools.
Okay. So if someone this looks really cool. So if someone wants to get exactly this, and I know you guys haven't released it yet, but maybe by the time this episode goes live that you might have it, where do they go to set something like this up?
Yeah, so if you would like to set something like this up, you go to arcade.dev and you'll see some examples. Docs.arcade.dev will show you some examples as well. But the easiest way to get started is if you are technical, but you can go and check out the Claude settings here and then developer. And then all you have to do is put in the commands to be able to run it. You edit this configuration and this config here. It's actually really simple. Should probably clear that out. But that's all you have to do. And then your MCP tool will be able to talk to your local Arcade instance.
Very cool. Alexander, what do you think?
Yeah, I think this is great. It's so cool seeing all these new things being available in Claude and making, all of these APIs that used to be just for engineers only available to everyone, and seeing the creativity that non-engineers are able to come up with to create new ways of working like this.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just wanted to show somebody from the Chronicle publishing firm. It's like said draft a response. And so it already says what I wanted to say. No, I did not submit anything for myself. And the email is saved to my draft folder, and I can send it as well.
Yeah. Oh man, this is pretty awesome. I really want to use this for all the LinkedIn DMs I get. That alone.
LinkedIn would let us use their OAuth API for getting messages. You'll see that we only have one LinkedIn tool, which is to post. LinkedIn actually is very restrictive with what it will allow people to do with its API. If you've wondered why Arcade is so consistent in that it seems like it works every time, it's because it's not using a browser-based approach. It's using a true OAuth API-based approach. And oftentimes one tool will call many different API calls. So you'll see Google search and retrieve documents in your drive down there below. That's going to call about 3 or 4 API calls. And so it's necessary for the API of the service to support a number of different functionalities, retrieving a document by ID in that case, which something like LinkedIn actually, since it's been covered by bots for so long, has defended itself against mercilessly.
Who knows if that will change? I feel like the ability to have access to this stuff, it's just the value you can get from it has increased. So who knows? Maybe they'll change their ways. Thank you for showing that to us. I mean, that looks incredible. The other thing I know we were going to go through a little bit is just how you basically use Cursor on a day-to-day basis. So this is for everybody who doesn't know Cursor, it's one of the fastest companies to get to 100 million in revenue. I think they're at more than 200 million now. And it is effectively a way to use LLMs to generate code. LLMs know how to generate code, but I guess what Cursor does is it makes it really easy. It just builds all the workflows around code generation. So you're not copying and pasting things into Claude or ChatGPT. You're just directly using an interface, an IDE.
Yeah, it has the context of your code base already. So you're able to ask it questions and ask it to build things. And it's not just starting from scratch. It's really using everything that you already have built and matching patterns that you have in the code, which I find really, really helpful. And I've become dependent on it. I've been using it so much to build little features here and there. And there was one day where I think that one of the LLM models I used for it was down, and I decided, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to write code now because what's the point?
When I was on a plane recently and I didn't have access to Cursor, and I realized, oh, wow, I don't remember as many terminal commands as I used to because I used the terminal. And so I don't remember all the terminal commands I used to know. Used to be a Vim wizard, and now I feel like I know half of what I used to because I don't need to anymore.
And, just give people a sense, a lot of people say, oh, we're using, GitHub's Copilot. That's what we use. This is better, right? People should use Cursor.
I would say it's subjective to some degree. GitHub Copilot's a little bit less, I would say, agentic or kind of invasive in some ways, in that invasive, not necessarily in a bad way, but for instance, indexing your code base. Cursor will actually go and create embeddings of your whole code base. And so it has a representative knowledge of all of your code. And in order for you to not have all that code, be stored by Cursor and then have access to it, you have to pay Cursor. That is one thing that is different between them. But Cursor also has a lot more functionality in terms of agent modes, that it's able to actually run commands and use tools like we were showing off earlier.
I think they're both always improving, though. I think I see the Cursor update pop up, 3 times a day, and GitHub is always releasing new versions, GitLab as well. Everyone's constantly making these things better and better. But I think, we use both in tandem for different purposes here too. So like we default to Cursor for writing code, but then we still use GitHub Copilot for reviewing that code on the in the GitHub interface. You create a pull request and then add Copilot as a reviewer, and it goes and points out the things that Cursor got wrong and helps you get better. So we have kind of like a system of agents going for writing things.
I think a lot of people actually do it like that. I think also that a lot of people do the tab inline from Copilot. So like the tab complete will be Copilot, but then the like agent edit and chat will be Cursor. I've seen that before as well.
Sam, I'd love if you could show us maybe some of the common things that, the common workflows that you might use on a day-to-day basis with Cursor.
Yeah. So here I have open this integration we have with the OpenAI agents library, and a pretty simple example you see here. And what this is just an agent that uses an Arcade tool to go and star the Arcade AI repo. And what you'll see over here is this like chat and all of the models that you can use. And so some of the things that you can do with this chat that might not be obvious. First of all, it's in what's called agent mode. There's ask, agent, and manual. Agent mode is the most useful. It's actually able to make changes. So if I said, change the name of this agent to great GitHub agent, and it's going to have the open file, and I'm actually able to just say accept. That's it.
Very cool.
Right. And so then I can review these files. Another way to use this is to also add context. And there's a lot of ways to actually do this. And a lot of people just do things like they'll add 1 or 2 files, but you can add terminals, you can add resources on the web, you can add your recent changes. Cursor rules are a way of constraining how Cursor acts. One of my favorites actually docs. And so like I can put the Arcade tool SDK, or you see like Playwright docs, and all you have to do to add a new doc is like, for instance, it has the PyTorch base there. I can say, let's do docs.arcade.dev. I think it requires you to do HTTPS. And let's call this main arcade docs. There you go. Share with team. And so now you'll see I have main arcade docs in here. And what I can do, let's go back to that file. And then here I can actually say docs, and you'll see main arcade docs here. And I can ask questions about Arcade, and it will actually go and review that documentation.
I think this is really cool because these things progress so fast. But one of the common things that I used to hear as an objection when we talk about using AI to write code was, well, our code base is too big. It doesn't really work. So what do you say to that?
I've built vector databases with billions and billions of embeddings. Your code base is not too big.
Okay. There you go.
The simple answer is you're not stuffing it all into a context window. That's actually a really bad idea. There's a great paper called Lost in the Middle, where it shows that if you just stuff the context window, what's in the middle of that context window is often forgotten. So important note to put your important prompt work at the beginning and the end. But what you want to go and do is search for relevant content. And that's why vector databases are actually used, is that because they search for semantically similar information. And so just for those of you who don't know, that's like if you're searching for relative, the word relative, something like, your normal frequency of keyword counter would not find the word brother. But a semantic search would find the word brother because brother and relative are very semantically similar in their meaning. LLMs are used to provide the judge that semantic meaning through the concept of an embedding. And with vector databases now, you can have billions and billions of embeddings in a single vector database. And so if you, chunk up your code, create embeddings, and you do it so correctly, you can have all of GitHub in a vector database if you want so.
So I'm curious on that too, and how that translates to prompts, because you obviously don't want to give the entire code base as context in a prompt, but that changes the way that you ask Cursor to do things too. So this was a pretty simple example of just, changing a particular string somewhere. But how do you go about breaking up your workflow when you want to do something that's a bit larger of a task?
One of the really easy ways here I'll show you is like if I say I don't like the way that the errors are structured. So I'll say I'm actually going to go to ask and I'll add content and I'll do code and I'll just do errors here. And I'm going to add our error handling reference and tool errors. And these are from the Arcade documentation, the authorization error that we have inside this documentation. And then I will go.
And Tim, have you guys is this all manually created documentation or did you use AI to write the docs?
A lot of it is templated, so things can be templated out and then filled in by an LLM, especially if they're repetitive like integrations. But it is, I'd say, 75% LLM generated. And really that 25% is like editing more than it is like writing. But to fully answer that question there, I usually then add a couple files. So things like, let's add the errors.py file. And then let's say, design a new way for the authorization error to be propagated. Completely redesign this error hierarchy and demonstrate the new approaches effectiveness, it doesn't matter. And then I'll say be complete, design the entire thing.
I'm curious on the caps. Why is that last part all caps?
Because it will be much more complete if you put it in caps.
Oh, really? Yelling at it helps?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I will tell it that people will be injured and like horrible things sometimes. I'm serious.
Are you serious? That's so funny.
No, because it takes it with a degree of seriousness that it wouldn't before. And so you'll see it's designing this entire new approach, which I'm actually going to consider. It's really good. That actually looks more like our main API. It did a great job.
So Sam, we're getting close to time here. I think we're having a lot of fun. This is really, really cool. Just so that, for everybody who's like non-technical and is listening and is thinking, I need to get my development teams to adopt these approaches. What would you say? Like there's this quote that's running around where Paul Graham says for 30% of the YC startups, 95% of the code's written using AI. Like, what would you say that is for you guys? Like, is that is that hyperbolic or do you think that's true? What would you say it is for you?
Really depends on your startup. I'd say for the teams that are looking into it, know your problem first. It's just like anything. Like if you don't know your problem definition, using AI is not going to help you find it. If you're a hammer looking for a nail, you're going to have problems. And just like I was talking to the prompt there, if you can't accurately state your problem and what you want and how you think it should be solved from a design perspective, AI is not going to help you. It's just going to make the problem worse. And once again, you have to know what you're looking for and know how in which to elicit the best from these tools, which does take a lot of practice. And so what I'd say is to anybody wanting to get into it, one, be a builder, go download it and play with it. Enter the chat, type into a Python file, and just see what it can do. That's going to be the easiest way to get started. Things like Claude or ChatGPT even could be interesting ways to get started. Start messing around with the ways to customize the system instructions, see how it reacts, and overall just become more familiar with LLMs and how they act. Even though they do change rapidly, there's a lot of common patterns by which they act. And in order to learn them, you really have to just sit around and prompt them. That's why the whole term prompt engineer came about for a little while. I think might still be around. It is true that if you do just hack away at them, you do learn quite a bit about, like, for instance, the caps thing. You can learn that yelling at them, they often do their job more often.
That's awesome. Sam, thank you for this. The question we always like to end on for the show is like, what are you most excited about over the next 12 months?
Well, Arcade, but besides Arcade, because that's a cheap answer, people are finally starting to pay attention to tools. MCP did us all a big favor there, even though it's still pretty immature. It always bugged me that Get Weather was the coolest thing we were giving to agents. like every demo ever was get_weather. And I'm going to become synonymous with hating this thing. I know it, but I just gave a talk on this actually. But we're finally giving them interesting tools. And we're finally seeing things like Cursor and Claude and interesting things being done by agents. And as someone who went through the CNN era of counting tomatoes and having people being like, AI is never going to be useful, it really excites me to see practical day-to-day use cases improving the lives of consumers through AI. And so I'm going to continue to be excited about the more, reactive real-world use cases that we see come out.
Sam, this was amazing. I think I learned a lot. I think everybody watching learned a lot. So thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
And Alexander, thanks for being a great co-host.
Oh, it was great fun. Thanks so much.
And that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of This New Way. If you like the content, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you can get notified when we post the next episode. See you next time.